let's do some lateral movement using C2 frameworks. Now what we're going to do today is going to be very simple. We're going to perform some lateral movement. And the idea of this lateral movement is to somehow utilize a C2 framework to help us do the lateral movement. So first of all, we're going to work with some tunnels using these C2 frameworks. And with these tunnels, we're going to chain the execution from the tunnels into the different kind of toolset, which is going to help us do the lateral movement. Now in the first scenario, we're going to use Impacket bundles and scripts that can help us perform lateral movement on various protocols such as WMI, SMB, and so on. Then we're going to try that with NXC. Here we're going to include Hound C2, which is my PowerShell based agent for Mythic. And you're going to see a little bit of action on how this works and how portable it actually is. Then we're going to go with some RDP. I'm not sure how stable that's going to be, but of course the other way of how to do lateral movement is via just simply RDPing into a system. If of course we have the rights, the permissions, the creds, and so on. Then we're going to speak about the built-in modules, because some of the C2s, or I can say mostly out of the C2s, have their own built-in modules, which can help us do lateral movement on systems, which do not require us to do a tunnel, because it's built in inside the C2, which can do the things on its own. Now, most of the times, these modules are custom implementations for things like PS exec or SMB exec or WMI exec and so on, but they were quite good, especially in cases where we don't need a tunnel. And then we're going to speak a little bit about SMB drops and how we can utilize SMB for getting our beacon there and perhaps running different tools to execute it on the target system. Now, my environment is again as follows. Now, if you watch my previous videos on stream, you're going to be quite familiar with that environment, but if you're not, welcome to the channel, welcome to the stream, and this is what we're going to be using today. Now, in that case, I have one custom Active Directory with a firewall inside and a custom domain. Now, on the external for this environment is my Kali system, where I have two C2 frameworks. In that case, we're going to be using Mythic on the one hand side and Sliver on the next hand side. Now, with these C2 frameworks, our job is going to be to establish some lateral movement. So let's imagine we already compromised this host there. So we're going to make that thread. So we compromise that host via, let's say, phishing, via, let's say, service-side attack. This might expose some vulnerable servers which we exploited. Never mind, we landed here. Now, since we are on the server, our job is going to be to move out different servers and perhaps exfiltrate more credentials in the aim of achieving domain admin. Now, I'm not saying that this is the only way of doing domain admin, but usually and most of the times we want to dump credentials, because most of the times it gives us some lateral movement tag vectors. Because if you dump credentials on a system, you might find a hash or a password for a user which can be admin or can log in to different systems via different protocols. So that's why you always want to dump credentials when you compromise a system. And now in our scenario, in our work environment, we've compromised this system, and essentially we want to try to move to this system and that system. So we're going to make that yellow for the case of keeping that as an objective. All right. So that's the setup. And my setup now is that I have a Sliver beacon. Now this Sliver beacon is running, as mentioned, on that system there, SQL02. That's our compromised system. Now, let's see what happens and how we can perform the lateral movement. Now, the first thing that might work is, as mentioned, establishing a tunnel and then getting the traffic from your system through that tunnel over the machine you want to target. Because usually, if you have Kali into the environment and you have credentials, you can directly perform code execution on different systems with the easiest options to be the Impacket bundle. So, whenever you're using C2, before using Impacket, you would need to establish a proper tunnel, because otherwise the traffic would not go through. So how you establish tunnel specifically for Sliver is you're gonna need a session for that. Because I can do use, I can select my beacon, Of course, here I can chain commands and operate from it, but some of these commands are not available. For example, socks. Why it's not available? Because that's how the nature of the beacon actually is. Now, when you have a beacon, let's draw that super fast. Let's do new Canva. When you have a beacon, let's say you have Kali or Sliver C2 here, and you have a Windows host there. Let's say Windows 10. When that's a beacon thing, beacon scenario, what happens is that as a specific time interval, the time interval you have for your beacon, for example, if I do reconfig -h and I can specify the interval there. So thank you guys in the shout out for pointing it out to me. So when you reconfigure your beacon or when you specify the callback interval, for n amount of seconds, the seconds you specify, the Windows host is actually going to communicate to the Sliver C2 asking if there are any tasks to utilize or to run. So this can be get tasks. Then Sliver is going to respond either with, yeah, you can execute these commands or you can execute something else. And then it's going to sleep for an amount of seconds. After this n amount of seconds, again, it's going to give us the response of the previous commands and also see if there are new to execute. Now, the key thing here is that the connection in the beacon scenario not only is first one directional. So the connection always goes from the Windows system through the C2, always in reverse order. So usually we don't have communication from the C2 to the Windows 10. Usually that's not happening. We have all the time communication from the Windows to the C2. Doesn't matter if it's a Sliver, Mythic, or a Havoc or anything else, doesn't matter. Alright. But the point is here that we have some callback interval, which can be seconds, minutes, and more, even days if needed. So in real red team operations, we set the callback interval to be something like 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, depends on how serious we think the network evasion is, the network security is. Usually 10 minutes is fine because one callback, one request is going to be over 10 minutes, and when combined with different OPSEC versions and tools and techniques, it's going to be pretty fine. But during pentest, we set that to be super fast, let's say 5 seconds, 4 seconds, 10 seconds, and so on. Alright. Now that's fine, but in that scenario, when we are using a beacon, we cannot do socks, we cannot do tunnel. Because if we set up a tunnel, we want to forward a lot of traffic from that host to, let's say, some other hosts. But if that traffic is going to be read only once in a 4 seconds or in a 5 minutes, then the tunnel is going to be unstable and it's going to break and die. So that's why, in order to the tunnel scenario to work, we're going to need a different scenario. And that scenario for Sliver is called session. So first we need to establish a session, that system, and while we have a session, we don't have a callback interval. We don't have that. Here, we don't have that. The communication is direct, and as soon as we give it a command or a task, the Windows system is going to automatically execute it, which means that there's going to be no wait, and if there's no wait, then we can tunnel the traffic more stable. Of course, that's usually not good OPSEC safe thing to do, because on the defender side, there are going to be a lot of walks and a lot of network traffic, which might end up getting you detected. But if we need to do a tunnel, that's how it works, and that's what we want to do. Now, in case of other C2s, because in Sliver you have specific, let's say, functionality for that in terms of a session itself, but for other C2 frameworks, you have to specify the callback interval to 0 seconds. So let's say if you need to use the tunnel or SOX, the SOX 5 over Mythic or over Havoc or over BRC4 or any other, you would need to set up the sleep interval to 0 and then perform your tasking, and you're gonna use the tunnel the same way. So that's why Sliver is a little bit different in that form, but I think session works quite good. So in order for that to happen, first we need to use the beacon. And now inside the beacon, because now if we have beacons, inside the beacon, if we do SOX 5, then we need to pretty much first start a session. As you see, Sliver says, please select a session via use and then use this command because it needs the direct communication in order to set up the SOX. Now, how to set up a session? Of course, we can generate a session, drop it, and run it, or the easy way, we can just do interactive, and Sliver is gonna do that automatically for us. So I'm gonna run that, and after a few seconds, Sliver should deploy in memory session implant started, and we're gonna have a session. Johan Brenner, how you doing, mate? Welcome. And there it is, we have our session started, and now we can use it to set up a tunnel. So I'm gonna do use, now specify the session there, that's quite important. I think it's looking good on the stream. Use that, and now what we can do is set up SOX 5 and then start. When you do so, first you're gonna open our interface on port 1081, which is the default Sliver port, and then we can use things like proxy chain to get the traffic going through that. Now, Sliver says that based on the protocol we are using, SOX can be a little unstable, so keep that in mind. If you have HTTP beacon, maybe try MTLS, maybe try TCP, raw TCP, and so on. So different beacons might affect the stability of the SOX itself. So by doing that, now we need to perform the lateral movement because our Kali is as if it's on the network. Because if we go back to the diagram, the one here, now when we have a SOX running, that means that all the tools and things we can run can be executed directly from this standpoint, as if we have the Kali on the same network, which is having the same IP on SQL1. So that's nice. So we can execute Kali tools from the IP of the SQL2. So now I'm gonna showcase how that winds out. I'm gonna go to desktop and lateral movement where I did a little bit of preparation. And here I have a file called proxychains4.conf. How I ended up having this file, I did cp etc proxychains.conf to here, and then I can simply edit it. Now, how did I edit it? The only thing I did is added SOX5 at the very bottom of the file, which is going to be with the same IP of the Sliver and the same port which is displayed here. That's going to say to proxy chains how it wants to forward the traffic when I use proxy chains. All right. Now, the only thing left is to use the Impacket, and how we use it is by using proxy chains. So proxy chains -f and specify the proxy chains file we just created. Why? Because if we don't specify the file, it's going to use the default one in etc, and I usually like to have different proxy chains file for the different tunnels I have. Usually in engagements we have like more C2 frameworks at once because sometimes one is good, sometimes one fails, and so on. So I like to have different kind of proxy chains file to make things a little bit organized. Then what we can do is use Impacket and some scripts from Impacket, such as psexec, wmexec, SMB So first things first, before doing any kind of lateral movement, I want to check if the SOX is actually working. How I check it is by doing netcat. So I know the DC IP is the one you see here, 172.60.60.50. On the DC, the port 445 should always be open, so you can use that as a reference. And then we can specify -mv to see if we can connect successfully. Now what you can see here is that we have port 445 open, which means that we can ultimately see the port and engage with the rest of the network of the Windows system, which is perfect. Now what we can do is let's try Impacket wmexec like that. Now the username we're gonna use is our compromised one, k2zat. So the domain is eosec.local, the user is k2zat, the password is gonna be for the Lich King, don't blame me, I'm a WoW fan. And then the host, the target machine is gonna be 172.60.60.52. Why 52? Because that's the IP of this system. So what we want is try to establish lateral movement and land here on SQL 01. So I can try and run that, and let's see what happens. We can see the traffic is established, it's accepted, we have OK. And here we have a CMD shell. In that CMD shell, all we can do is run my commands, run scripts, run another C2 beacon, and we're gonna be fine. And as you can see, we are on that system. We can do hostname, and there it is, we are SQL 01. Now in that case, we used Impacket WMI exec, and the way WMI exec works is it does command execution via WMI. It's important to know because if you see the WMI output, we are still as the session of the same user we used before. That's important because if you want to get a beacon as the same user, we can use WMI exec or Evo WinRM, if it's possible, of course. And if we use SMB exec or PS exec, we're gonna have a shell as a system user. But doesn't matter which one of Impacket scripts we use, the idea is the same. We set up a tunnel, we use the Impacket scripts, and we have lateral movement. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm gonna do one with PS exec. Run that. I'm doing good. I'm Brenner. How are you? How are you doing, mate? Thanks, mate. Yeah, thank you so much. Appreciate the support. Special thanks to all the patrons, you included. Yeah, special thanks. Right, here looks like something happened. So perhaps what we can try is instead of using custom PS exec binary, we can try using one from Sliver or use built-in module from Sliver to establish the same thing, but of course that's later on the agenda. So that thing seems to failed. I'm gonna smash Control C and I wanna try with SMB exec. There it is, now it works. As you can see, if I do who am I, we can see there is a anti-authority system answer, which means that we are not the user, in that case the DA, which we compromised, but we are the system user for this specific system. So that's important when you want to do lateral movement to pick your technique so you have a beacon as the user you want. Perfect. All right. With that being said, we have the Impacket bundle discussed. And now using the same tunnel, one more way of how you can do lateral movement is via NXC or crack map exec. Now usually I'm a fan of NXC. I like it more, for me it's more stable and I just prefer it. So that's my preference. I know guys who use and stick to crack map exec, that doesn't really matter. So what you can do now is use the same tunnel as before. Now keep in mind that it's important to specify the proxy chains file. Otherwise, proxy chains would use the default, which is not configured for the tunnel we use now. So in that case, I can do NXC. I can specify the protocol I want, for example, SMB. Specify my IP, 172.60.60.52. And again, you need form of authentication. In that case, I specify my user and password. And then with -x, if it's a small x, let me do that a little bit bigger, like that. If it's a small x, you execute cmd.exe/c and the thing you specify in the quotes. Alright. But if it's a capital X, like that, you execute PowerShell -c and then what's in the quotes. So if you use -x, you by default is going to use PowerShell environment. If it's a small x, you're going to use by default CMD environment. Alright. In that case, of course, you can be as creative as you want. For example, you can drop your beacon on a file share and you can use -x to just simply execute it. Or in that case, I'm going to use my C2 agent inside the Mythic, which is super easy to use and I can say it's quite good, but that's for the patrons to say. So how it works is you can generate a simple beacon, all the normal way you do using any other Mythic agent. So you go to action, generate payload, Windows, cont, you add the built-in IMC bypass, you add the compress option, then you add your commands, specify how you want to connect, and that's it. So I've already generated my beacon, and it's inside my video folder, and there it is, it's a h.ps1. In that case, that h.ps1 is a compressed, obfuscated version of the script. So essentially, you can just execute it, IEX it, and it's gonna work. So the main idea of the haunt agent is to be portable. I mean, it's PowerShell based. It's not gonna achieve the evasiveness of an agent which is built on C, for example, but it's extremely portable. And for example, we can use that command NXC, specify IP, target, username, password, and just one simple IEX is enough. You can also embed the whole base64 command here, that's also an option, and if it's compressed it's gonna be, let's say, smaller and can be accepted, but IEX is the cleanest one of them all. So by doing so, it's gonna first see the authentication, we can see we can pawn the system because we have the rights, and now it's gonna perform a web request, read the file, execute from memory, and we have a beacon there. So if you go to active callbacks, there it is, we have the beacon there. Mythic says it's a administrative beacon because of the red inside the whole beacon icon. Now the one with blue are with medium integrity, but the one with red are with admin integrity. And now here we can start now to operate with the beacon. For example, I can do what, who am I, what Eves, what netstat, and operate with a beacon, right? That the normal way you would want to use your beacon. There it is. So that's one way of also doing lateral movement, and that's why I designed the Horn C2 agent. Because as mentioned, it's extremely portable. You just need one simple command execution, you run one IX, and you have full standalone working beacon, which is capable of executing assemblies, executing BOFs, executing PEs, now without an output, but you can run it, but it's still in development. And now, here is the moment to say special thanks to my patrons, and this beacon is pretty much available to them because they support me, I support them with knowledge, tools, and techniques, and we are all happy. So, thank you so much, appreciate the support. And if you have further appreciation watching this video or the stream, you can consider become a Patreon. There you're gonna find all of things that I'm sure you can find interesting. Alright, moving on. So that was the NXC part. And now the cool thing is that here, even though it looks like it hangs, if you smash Ctrl C, the beacon's still gonna work. So it's fine. You can run this command, you can establish your beacon, and then you can smash Ctrl C, it's gonna operate, it's gonna be fine. Perfect. Just one try. There it is. Okay, perfect. Now, the next thing I want to showcase is the RDP. Now again, we would need to use a tunnel for it, but this is usually not ideal because RDP is actually super traffic needy, I can say. The reason for that is in case, let's say, of WMI exec or with SMB exec, all we want is to run the WMI command or to drop a batch script or a service executable and run it. That's it. So the amount of traffic is not that much. But when it's about RDP, the amount of traffic which is generated is huge because it's not only CLI based connection, but it's a graphical GUI based connection which needs a lot of resources. So usually I go for that last because, as mentioned, it needs a lot of resources and it can be quite unstable. We're gonna test it now, but I'm not sure how stable it's gonna be. So that's why I always go for that last. So the way that works is, again, if we have a tunnel, we can use things like X3RDP to pretty much establish the connection. Now I don't have this installed, so I can do sudo apt install and that. Mhm. All right. Do I have that? I don't think that's the same, to be honest. Hmm. Let's see. Based on the UI and the options, it looks the same. Can I do minus PTH? I can. Okay, perfect. So the cool thing about X3 RDP is that if you have the hash of the user, and of course NTLM authentication is enabled, you can do pass the hash and achieve RDP connection, which is something hard if you want to use that from Windows environment. Okay, so there it is. We can try minus V to be the host, so 172.60.60.52. The username is going to be again K to Z. The password is going to be again the Lich King, and that's it, I think. So what we can do now is again specify the proxy chains minus F, specify the file, and let's see if it's gonna work. So let's do permanent, accept the certificate, and it's doing something. Again, that should be unstable. Now in my case, I have these systems inside one network. Now, of course, this is a separated virtual network. This is a separate virtual network, but at the end, we're using the same router. So the traffic do not fly that far away. But if you compromise the real system, which is far away from you, and that's gonna be mess. So even now we don't have much things going on. Maybe I can try do that one more time, but I'm skeptical that's gonna work. Now, if you have other configuration of environment, and let's say you have a secure starting point, a TeamViewer application, or let's say a VPN access, then you can directly try to RDP. But doing RDP from socks actually sucks. So in most of the cases, it's quite bad. That's why I decide to stick that to this option last, because it's just super slow. And even if we have something there, it's going to be again super slow, and this highly depends on the SOX itself, on the C2 framework, how it handles SOX, and so on. Usually, so far, I was doing a more stable RDP using the legal NG, using this one there. I already have a video about it, actually the previous video on my channel, so if you want to learn how to use it, you can check it out. It's quite badass, I can say. But the point is to with these two I was able to do RDP, but it was again slow and laggy. So don't expect to have a stable RDP, right? That's not gonna happen. But still there's an option for it. So we don't have to completely forget it. But in some cases, I would go for more stable tunnel like Liguro NG, and then perhaps use the RDP this way. Or if we have a direct VPN connection, we can again use RDP from the connected VPN instance. Also fine. And now one other cool way of doing lateral movement is using built-in modules for the C2. Now, Sliver has some nice C2 modules which are quite badass. Now, the first C2 module, which is built in for lateral movement, is SSH. You can use SSH to directly execute a command on an SSH host. And the cool thing about it is that it do not have to be Linux, it has to be SSH host. So there can be also SSH servers on Windows based. And if you find SSH credentials, you can directly inject and run SSH commands from this Windows SSH server. And also the cool thing about that is you can also specify a private key. So even though the SSH server might not use password authentication, if you have the key, you can still do the same using this module, which is quite badass. The next module about it is essentially the MSF or the MSF inject. because what it does is it allows you to inject MSF payload into a process so that OS can be abused for lateral movement in some cases. All right. And the next thing we want to speak about is, of course, execute and execute shellcode and so on, because, for example, you can spawn a program which can do lateral movement, you can execute it. But the one I want to showcase is the PSExec. So essentially, with PSExec, I think that's badass because you can utilize the token of your user. For example, I can do who am I, and inside the who am I, you can see that right now I am Kel'Thuzad. I'm gonna for a second stop the chat just not to interfere with the sections there. All right. So as you can see, we have the current token, and that's Kel'Thuzad. Which means that by compromising this server, let's say Kel'Thuzad click the link, and we have the token for this user here. By having the token, it means that we are now authorized for the whole AD and the machine we have as this user. And even though we don't have its password or password hash, we can use this PSExec module to spawn and create lateral movement attacks even if we don't have the password. Which to me is badass, because here, if you specify, as you can see, the Impacket PSExec or the NXC and so on, in that case we need the username and credentials and password, because we would need to first authenticate, see if we can do the lateral movement, and then do it. But here, we don't need to do it because we are already Kel'Thuzad. We don't need to specify any credentials, we don't need to specify any authorization. We can simply execute the module. So we can do help PSExec to see how it works, and essentially we can do PSExec and specify all the arguments and specify the hostname. The hostname is a string. So it can use either DNS or it can use also IP. I believe there's an NS lookup, but I'm not sure exactly. But never mind, should be fine. So here, in order to use PSExec, what we can do is specify either a custom executable you want to execute, or we can also let Sliver generate one automatically and inject this one there. Of course, in a real environment, I would name the service some form, let's say something custom, like Edge service or Mozilla service or TeamViewer service or MobileX service, anything that's not Sliver, of course. But in that case, we don't need that because, of course, or we don't need to tweak with it now. And also, the Sliver gives us an option to specify a pre-built profile if we have one, which is also a thumbs up for Sliver, and I start to like this C2 more and more the more I use it. So it's badass. Now what we can do is do PSExec, and now in that case we can specify -b or minus being bad, and specify the directory to which the executable will be dropped. Now here we can specify the directory with C, Windows, temp, for example, and also keep in mind that even though the description says that, I usually like to encode that and use escape slashes, so convert the / to double /. Alright. And then we can also do, it's just a directory, so it's fine. Okay. And then we can do -c for custom executable. Now I already have an executable there, so I can do is that and copy this executable like that. And now we need the hostname. So in that case, what we can try is dc01 lsec.local. Actually, do that a bit no because I mistyped the name. lsec.local, and that's fine. Now Sliver is, I like it because it's thinking about the OPSEC things, and if you try to execute something stupid like I'm doing now, it's gonna give you the corresponding error. Or not error, but warning. You're going to deploy the following service, name Sliver, description Sliver implant. You might want to change that before going further. This action is bad OPSEC, are you an adult? Now of course, we're testing, we don't care about it, but usually if you need to care about OPSEC, you of course change the service name. So I can do yes here. I'm an adult, I guess. So let's run that. So first, since we have the predefined binary, it's gonna upload it to the corresponding folder. You have dc01 eosec.local, C Windows temp, and it gave a randomized name. In that case, it's gonna wait a little bit, and right off the bat, we can see a new beacon actually appeared. There it is. So now we have similar issue with the NXC before. It started the service, we have the beacon, it's running, we have the lateral movement, but that's looping. So be brave, don't worry, spam Control C, you can go back to Sliver, you can type beacons, and there you are, you have the beacon for the DC itself. So with that, I can simply do use, specify the beacon I want, the one for the DC itself, and there it is. Right now, I'm inside the domain controller itself. So that's how you can use a built-in module for lateral movement. And again, most of the times, built-in modules are based on techniques that Impacket utilizes. Things like PSExec, things like SMB exec, and so on. But as you can see, in some places, using the module is more efficient, is better, and is possible. Because in that case, let's say the user clicked the link and executed the malware, we don't have the password, but we don't need the password because we can use in-situ module which gets the token from memory and use this token for authentication, which is quite good. And some other things what we might do is perform SMB drop. So just connect using SMB, drop your file, and use, let's say, different PSExec module to execute them. It's also a nice idea, but this is just as a tip and a recommendation. So that's what I wanted to share, guys, with you. So I appreciate you watching. I hope you learned something new, and I hope this was useful. Now I started to set up a playlist on my channel, so each video having a specific topics like networking, lateral movement, infrastructure, and so on is going to be placed into the corresponding playlist, so it's going to be easier for you to track the videos, see what needs, what you need, and essentially navigate over the whole content. Yeah, well, with that being said, I want to say thank you so much, and I'm gonna definitely see you into the next one. If you have questions, if you have feedback, always you can use the comment section or join Discord and let me know what you think. Bye bye, and see you to the next one.